At 9 a.m., Jamal Everett stepped into courtroom 2B, the kind of man whose presence shifted the energy of the room without a single word. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene, but everything about him exuded quiet confidence. He walked in calm, unbothered, his tailored navy blue suit sharp against the ordinary hum of the courtroom. But it was the gold cross hanging just below his tie that caught everyone's eye. That cross wasn't a mere accessory. It was a part of him, a piece of home. It had belonged to his grandmother, a woman whose strength had shaped him in ways words never could. She wore it every day, even as chemotherapy drained her strength. She used to say, "Baby, no matter how far you go, always carry a piece of home with you." That was what the cross meant, a reminder of her love, resilience, and the grounding force that kept him steady no matter where life took him. Jamal had just passed the bar exam, achieving the highest score in the state. But today he wasn't a lawyer yet. He was just a clerk, helping draft motions and carry files, taking in every lesson the legal world had to offer. It was another day of quiet hustle. But it wasn't going to stay quiet for long. The judge presiding over the session was Judge Carol Whitman, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper demeanor. At 62, she had earned respect, through fear, if not trust. Her courtroom was known for its strict order. No gum, no phones, no distractions. But when she saw Jamal's cross gleaming under the overhead lights, she didn't hesitate. "Sir," she said coldly, "remove that necklace." Jamal was caught off guard. He glanced around, unsure if she was speaking to him, but she wasn't. "This is a courtroom, not a church," she continued, her words sharp. "Religious symbols have no place here." Jamal didn't flinch, staying calm and respectful. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe I'm within my rights to wear this." But the judge wasn't listening. "You're not. Remove it, or I'll find you in contempt of court." The room froze. Whispers began to ripple from the back, and even the bailiff looked uncertain. But Jamal remained unmoved. His voice was steady as he calmly replied, "Your Honor, there is no rule prohibiting this." The judge didn't spare him another word. "That's enough. Contempt of court, $200 fine. I suggest you brush up on courtroom etiquette." Jamal's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He didn't make a scene. He simply nodded, sat down, and the case moved forward. But everything had changed. The atmosphere in the room was different now, as if the air had thickened. People could feel it. Jamal had taken a stand, whether he intended to or not. For the next 5 minutes, the courtroom buzzed quietly with the weight of what had just transpired. Jamal sat still, the gold cross still hanging from his neck, a symbol of his resolve. His supervisor, Rhonda James, leaned over and asked softly, "You okay?" Jamal nodded, eyes fixed on the judge. "She's dead wrong," he muttered under his breath. Rhonda looked nervously toward the bench. "Just don't poke the bear." But it was too late. The bear was already awake. After court adjourned for lunch, Jamal gathered his files and walked down the hallway with Rhonda. As they passed a group of clerks gathered by the vending machines, Jamal overheard one mutter, "Should have just taken it off." Jamal stopped in his tracks, turning toward the clerk. The young man tried to wave it off. "I mean, you could have avoided all this. Just take it off for an hour, and you're done." Jamal's response was measured but firm. "If I have to hide my faith to be treated with respect in a government building, then the problem isn't the necklace." The hallway fell silent, but not everyone disapproved. Thomas Ray, an old-school bailiff and former Marine, pulled Jamal aside near the elevator. "I've worked here for 20 years, he said in a low voice. "Never seen her do that to anyone, not once. Keep your head, son. People are watching." Jamal nodded, but in his mind, he was already crafting an appeal. Every precedent, every case. The judge thought she was teaching him a lesson, but what she didn't know was that she had just stepped into his lesson. Later that afternoon, in a small legal office 2 blocks away from the courthouse, Jamal sat at a corner desk, his laptop open before him. His fingers moved quickly as he typed out his grievance, citing legal precedent, his mind sharp with resolve. Whitman versus Public Expression, 2024. A $200 fine issued without legal basis. First Amendment rights upheld. Case after case, he quoted, his fingers flying across the keys. Rhonda peeked over his shoulder, her voice soft with concern. You're filing a grievance? Jamal didn't pause. Not just that. I'm writing a memorandum for public record. Rhonda sighed. You really want that smoke? He stopped typing and looked at her, his gaze unwavering. I didn't come this far to be silent. Not for a judge, not for anybody. By the time Friday morning rolled around, his grievance had reached the desk of the Georgia Judicial Review Board. By Saturday, it had leaked to a civil rights blog. By Sunday, it was all over Twitter. People were talking, lawyers, journalists, former clerks, and defendants alike. Everyone had a story. She always had it out for anyone who didn't play by her rule, they said. I got kicked out for wearing a head wrap, one woman shared. She fined a man for saying amen after being acquitted. The cracks in Judge Whitman's authority were starting to show, and she didn't even know it yet. But Jamal did. He'd seen this kind of play before. This time, though, he was writing the ending. Before Jamal Everett ever set foot in a courtroom, he sat at a folding table in the back room of Greater Mount Hope Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. His grandmother, Miss Geraldine, had raised him after his mother passed. She had a voice like gravel and gold, one that could scold you and pray for you all in the same breath. She pinned that gold cross around her neck every Sunday morning and told him, Baby, if you don't stand for something, you'll kneel for anything. That cross stayed with her through hospital visits, chemo rounds, and long nights when Jamal sat beside her bed, trying to study for midterms, his heart heavy with grief. When she passed, he didn't cry at the funeral until the preacher handed him that necklace. He wore it through every interview, every presentation, every job. Not out of superstition, but as a grounding force, a symbol of the strength that had carried him. And when Judge Whitman demanded he take it off, it wasn't just about jewelry. It was about dignity. It was about who gets to decide what that looks like. Jamal wasn't just carrying a piece of his grandmother with him. He was carrying a piece of resistance, quiet, respectful, unshakable. She had always believed that respect needed to be earned, especially in her courtroom, and that it was earned through silence and obedience, not through faith, culture, or protest. She didn't hate Jamal. She didn't even know him. But when she saw that cross around his neck, something inside her snapped. She would never admit it, but deep down, she remembered a moment from 20 years ago in a courtroom in Charleston. Back then, she had been laughed out of a motion hearing by a male judge who told her to smile more. She remembered how small she felt, how invisible she had been. And now, sitting on that bench, she swore she would never feel that way again. So she made others feel small first. But power without reflection is dangerous. Jamal wasn't just some random clerk in a tie. He was a rising star at Benson and Clay, one of the most respected civil rights firms in the Southeast. He had already been invited to speak at law schools in New Orleans and Tallahassee. His bar exam scores had stunned professors. People were already watching him before this incident, but now they were paying attention. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about what happens when someone who has done everything right gets punished simply for being who they are. And the world loves a man who responds with grace and facts instead of shouting. By Monday morning, the phones at the Magnolia County Courthouse were ringing off the hook. Clerks tried to remain calm, but it was clear they were nervous. Calls from local reporters, emails from national outlets, it was chaos. One clerk whispered to another, "He's trending." The other one shook her head. "Lord, this isn't good." At Benson and Clay, Jamal walked in like it was any other morning, but the conference room was already buzzing. A paralegal handed him a printout. The blog post had already hit over 250,000 views overnight. Headlines were everywhere, all with his face on them. Georgia judge fines legal clerk for wearing a religious necklace. Experts call it unconstitutional. Crossfire in the courtroom. Harassment or protocol. Young black lawyer pushes back on power. Jamal hadn't even posted the memo himself. Someone else had forwarded it to a journalist. Now he was the center of a conversation he hadn't asked for, but wasn't running from either. Rhonda closed the door behind her. "You ready for this?" Jamal looked up from his notes. "I didn't start it, but I'm not backing down either." She nodded. Good, because it's growing fast. By noon, civil rights attorneys from Baltimore, Miami, and Los Angeles were tweeting in support. A law professor from UCLA had written an in-depth breakdown of the legal mistakes in Judge Whitman's decision. Even a retired Supreme Court clerk had weighed in on Reddit. Then came the radio shows, podcasts, and news segments. The cross had become a symbol, not just of Jamal's faith, but of a bigger question. Who gets to define professionalism in spaces that were never designed for everyone to belong? That night, Jamal sat on his couch, phone buzzing nonstop, the lights dim. He scrolled through messages. One read, I wore a hijab to jury duty and was pulled into a separate room for clarification. Thank you for standing up. Another said, my grandfather wore a yarmulke at a traffic court, and the judge wouldn't even look at him. One message stood out. It had no name, just 2 lines. I saw what she did to you. She did something similar to me back in 2019, but I didn't know how to fight back. The next morning, as Jamal sipped his coffee, Rhonda called. She responded, she said flatly. Who? Jamal asked, already knowing the answer. Whitman. She said your behavior was disruptive and that court decorum must be preserved at all times. She claims she's faced threats and misrepresentation. Jamal didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window, the sunlight flashing off his watch. Let them talk, he finally said. I'm filing the formal brief today. Later that afternoon, Jamal walked back into the courthouse with his gold cross tucked just under his tie. Not to provoke, but to finish what he had started. People watched him, waiting for something to happen, and maybe they were right. He walked into a closed-door meeting with his attorney, a representative from the state bar, and a constitutional expert from Georgia State. He handed them his memorandum. Calm, clean, precise. It wasn't full of emotion. It didn't have to be. The law was already on his side. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Not angry, not loud, just present. Supporters, students, church elders, even a few quiet critics who had come to listen, not shout. What had started as a fine had now become a mirror, and everyone was seeing something different in the reflection. By Wednesday morning, Courtroom 2B wasn't just a place for motions and minor hearings. It had become the center of a statewide storm. TV vans lined the street outside, and inside, Judge Carol Whitman sat behind the bench. Her usual iron expression had softened slightly. Her tired eyes, jaw clenched, fingers twitching on the gavel, betrayed her discomfort. She knew that the room felt different that day, charged, not just full. Jamal entered, Rhonda beside him. His steps were slow, deliberate. He didn't need to look around. He could feel it. All eyes were not on the cross. They were on him. A representative from the Georgia Judicial Conduct Board was seated just feet from the bench. The meeting wasn't formal, but it was heavy. They were reviewing Jamal's grievance in real time. Judge Whitman tried to continue the session as if nothing had changed, but her voice wavered. At one point, she paused mid-sentence, took a breath, and looked directly at Jamal. Mr. Everett, she said, dry and official, do you have anything you wish to state for the record regarding your prior conduct in this court? Jamal stood up slowly, adjusted his tie, and spoke in a steady voice. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to clarify that my conduct has never been disruptive. I've always complied with this court's procedures, and I wore a religious symbol that does not violate any written rule nor any constitutional guideline. The room fell silent. Whitman leaned forward. You felt targeted? Jamal didn't blink. I was. She didn't argue. She didn't bark back. Not this time. After court recessed, she retreated to her chambers without a word. Hours later, the board convened a private session. Jamal and Rhonda were invited in. The head investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Dolores King, spoke first. Mr. Everett, We've reviewed your filing. We've interviewed courthouse staff. We've examined the pattern of conduct in Judge Whitman's courtroom, and what we found raised serious concerns. Rhonda stayed quiet as Dolores continued. You're not the first to experience this kind of selective enforcement under her authority, but you're the first who put it in writing and put your name on it. Jamal didn't smile. He just nodded. Later that week, the findings were made public. The board issued a formal rebuke to Judge Whitman, citing inconsistent application of courtroom rules, bias in enforcement, and behavior inconsistent with judicial impartiality. She wasn't removed, but she was placed under supervision, forced to undergo judicial ethics training, and the contempt fine was dropped and expunged. That Friday, Jamal sat on a folding chair in the basement of Greater Mount Hope during a youth mentoring event. Kids asked him questions about law school and what it was like to go up against a judge. He leaned forward and said, "You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to yell to be right. Sometimes just standing still is enough to shake the ground." Someone in the back shouted, "Say that again!" He laughed, holding the chain around his neck. But across town, Judge Whitman sat alone in her office. Her once proud demeanor now seemed deflated. She stared at the memo Jamal had submitted, reading it for the fifth time. It was brilliant, not just legally, but personally. It was respectful, professional, sharp, fair, and deep down she knew this young man, the one she had tried to silence, hadn't just won the argument. He had won her attention. She closed the file and looked out at the cloudy sky through her narrow office window. She whispered to herself, "I was wrong." But apologies don't erase actions. They just give them a place to rest. 2 weeks later, Jamal stood on the steps of Savannah State University, invited to speak at a campus-wide forum on justice and personal conviction. The auditorium had been packed, but it was after the talk, on those concrete steps under a gray sky, that people really leaned in. A freshman approached and said, "Man, I thought I had to change who I am to fit into law school. Now I think maybe the system needs to fit us too." Jamal smiled. "Don't let anybody make you shrink to make them comfortable. Not in a courtroom, not in life." That line spread all over social media, a clip of him saying it hit 1 million views by the next day. But Jamal wasn't chasing fame. He was just telling the truth. Back at the courthouse, change was slow but visible. A new poster went up in the hallway. Respect includes culture, belief, and presence. Judge Whitman didn't attend the ceremony when it was installed, but she signed off on it. Later, she called Rhonda James personally and asked for Jamal's number. Rhonda hesitated, then passed it along. The next day, Jamal received a short voicemail. "Mr. Everett, this is Judge Carol Whitman. I owe you a direct apology. I misjudged you. I misapplied the law, and I see that now. I hope one day we can speak. That's all." He didn't call her back, not out of spite, but because some lessons don't need a conversation. They just need to be remembered. Instead, Jamal focused on what came next. He started teaching part-time at a local high school on weekends. Civics, law, self-respect. He told his students, "The law is only as fair as the people brave enough to question it." And every time someone asked about the necklace, he'd say, "It's not about religion. It's about memory. It's about not letting people rewrite who you are just because they're uncomfortable with the parts that shine." The kids got it. One student raised her hand and said, "So it's like fighting back without fighting ugly?" He laughed. "Exactly." The cross stayed on his chest, not as a weapon, not as a statement, but as a piece of truth that never needed permission. In the end, the fine disappeared, but the impact stayed. Jamal hadn't just defended himself, he had forced an institution to check itself, and he did it with calm, class, and precision. Not through anger, but through clarity. Because sometimes strength doesn't come from how loud you get. It comes from how still you stand when everything tries to knock you off center. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, talk about it. And if it reminded you of who you are, don't hide it. The world doesn't need more silence.